Welcome again to the Talking Pictures podcast with hosts Tony Toscano, CC Chambers, and Raquel Baldwin-Horton.
And welcome to the Talking Pictures podcast. This is a very special podcast for me. I'm Tony Toscano.
I am CC Chambers.
And with me is Academy Award-winning director, producer, writer, and author now, the absolutely fabulous Keith Merrill, who I met really yesterday in a panel discussion. We share a lot of the same philosophies as far as our love for Westerns, our love for cowboys and all. Keith, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
My first question, of course, and we're going to have a wonderful conversation for the next few minutes, is as a kid, going to a movie and seeing those lights flicker, and images, that changes people's lives when they see it the first time, isn't it?
Oh, I think so. People often ask, where my fascination, my passion for movie making began. It really began when I was 7 years old. I lived in a little rural town in Farmington, Utah, where the local bishop of the Mormon ward actually had twin 35mm movie projectors installed in the cultural hall, which was absolutely unheard of.
Wow.
But every Thursday night, in our little town, there was a show. There was no movie theater for miles around. And so starting about age 7, I went to a movie every Thursday night. And of course, it was a fascinating world. And
everybody has a phone, don't worry.
Yeah. Anyway, so it had a huge impact on me. I remember those days. Well, first of all, it's the first place I ever held a girl's hand.
Wow.
So at age 9, so that
was the rest
of
the girl
memorable.
Attached to the hand? By the way, I just have to ask.
I'm sorry.
You're just holding a hand, but was the rest of the girl attached?
He's being a little macabre.
Oh yeah, that's right. Well, you can ask a question like that at Comic-Con, and I think it's a legitimate question.
A legitimate question.
Anywhere else it may not be. But
did you have a fascination? I know that cowboys mean a lot to you, but was that your favorite genre growing up, or did you like horror? Did you like science fiction?
Well, no. I mean, I think really, I was watching movies in the late 40s, early 50s, is the era I'm talking about as a young kid, and so the movies were primarily westerns. I mean, it was the Randolph Scott, it was Roy Rogers, Gene Autry, Lash LaRue, Hopalong Cassidy. Those were the movies, and I was, I lived on a small farm. We had horses and all those things. So it's only natural for me that I favor that genre. I always have. I'm so excited about the new Magnificent Seven coming, for example.
Yeah, this is I think the fourth time the movie's been remade.
Yeah, well, it is. Yeah,
it was Seven Samurai.
Yeah, that's right, Seven Samurai. But I don't ever remember horror films. I do remember the early sci-fi. The Flash Gordon and the serials. And the Harry Houseman effects and all those things. The serials. Those
I had the privilege.
Days.
I had the privilege of meeting George Powell years ago. Through my aunt. And he had done the original Puppetoons.
Oh, yeah,
And then, of course, the War of the Worlds and all of that was one of his movies that really kind of changed my life. And you can't find it anymore. It's The Seven Faces of Dr. Lao.
Oh, I
remember that one with Tony Randall?
Yeah, vaguely, yeah.
And that was such a magnificent special effects treat for a 9 or 10-year-old kid to watch.
Yeah, and now you watch it now, you'd be startled. Now that we've been so spoiled with digital effects, which anymore can. If you can imagine it, you can now create it in a sense of reality, which is beyond belief. But you're right. I mean, the early effects movies, and we knew they were effects, and they were kind of cheesy, but it didn't matter.
Well, Harryhausen was the one that really kind of brought those things to life.
Yeah, right. I mean, the giant spiders and all those things.
I love giant spiders. Winning the Academy Award, I asked you this at the panel yesterday, but that has to be a moment that's frozen in your mind in time forever.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, of course. And it was... I really had low expectations. As we talked yesterday, I mentioned that David Wolper had a film on that soccer team that had gone down in the Andes and turned to cannibalism to survive. I mean, it was an incredibly movie and headlines, and so everybody assumed that was the winner. And so when I won, it was like, I mean, to be nominated was like huge. I mean, I'm a farm kid from Farmington, Utah. Good grief, what am I doing in Hollywood, And interestingly, like I also said, I mean, there are doctors that replace hearts and save lives and correct cleft palates and spend years of their own expense to help people in third world nations. Nobody gives them gold trophies. And so I try to keep it in real perspective, because we, in our business, tend to pat ourselves on the back a lot. But that said, it really did and continues to open doors. I mean, I basically can always get the first meeting on the strength of, he's an Academy Award winner, even if it was also, before they were born.
Keith, you have to also understand that there's another little kid growing up in some farm town who's seen your movie and has changed his life. And granted, the gold statues are nice and all of that. Believe me, they do a lot for your career. But you change people's lives too, as a filmmaker, as a writer, as a producer, and now as an author. Tell us a little bit about the book.
Well, the book is the book that's being featured here at Comic-Con is the first in a series. The series is called Saga of Kings. The book is The Immortal Crown. It's my second novel. The third one is in final edit, which will come out next year. But it's interesting. I mean, I've written hundreds of screenplays, many of which have been made into movies, but I had a publisher. I had the unique advantage of having a publisher come to me and say, will you please write a book, as opposed to going through that,
that process of being in the slush pile half the time.
Rejection. I read that wonderful book by Stephen King on writing, and he used to keep his rejection slips on a nail. Well, I didn't have that experience. I had a publisher come and for 10 years say, well, write a book. And so they loved the book, and they came back and said, now we'd like you to take on an epic fantasy. And I said, I shouldn't say this on a podcast, but I've not been a fantasy fan. I'm not a big fantasy reader. The classic fantasy, Lord of the Rings, George R.R. Martin, Game of Thrones.
High five. There we go.
Because that's but that compared to like Percy Jackson and Robert Jordan and all those guys, I mean, it's like a totally different world. And that's so I said, if I can write it at that level, because that's kind of who I am, it's my voice, and you can't do much about it. So anyway, so that's where it came from. So the publisher said, well, we'd like you to take it on, and I have, and people will read it like it, Whether it'll ever reach this crowd or not, I have no idea.
Well, we know a good director that can make that into a movie.
Yeah.
And we know actors.
Yeah,
there we go.
And as I slide a card across the table.
Okay, yeah. And ladies and gentlemen, for those of you listening to the podcast, we are now doing an audition for Crystal Chambers.
There you go. But as we're wrapping up, advice to young filmmakers?
Tell the truth. People say, well, how can you say that if you're talking fiction? And it's because that's the whole idea of telling stories, is to try to synthesize the human experience in a way that's meaningful, and that I always like to. I mean, I use it when I talk in movies, when I pitch movies. I say I think movies need to entertain, number one. They need to enlighten, and they need to inspire. And I think there's a huge responsibility, and I would say to young filmmakers, take seriously your responsibility to talk to people who give you their lives for 2 hours in the dark, because that's what people do when they watch a movie. Now it's diminished now with streaming and television and watching on your iPhone, because there are a lot of other distractions. But classic movies in a theater, people basically say, I will turn over my heart, my emotion, my mind to you for 2 hours in the dark. And so I would say, tell the truth and be honest, but don't forget to entertain, enlighten, and most of all, inspire, because the world is a dark enough place. And I just encourage young filmmakers to not look to the dark side, but look to the thing that's positive, that's enlightening, that people will walk out and say, I'm a better person for having seen this movie, as opposed to I want to go out and become an axe murderer,
Keith Merrill, it is an honor to talk with you twice in one weekend.
Oh, thank you.
One of my heroes, and you're coming over for a barbecue someday.
I'd love that.
Oh, do that.
Great.
Thank you, Keith. I'm Tony Toscano.
Thank you. Okay, and Crystal, we will put this in right at the top of our actor file. Okay.
Yay! I love that.
Perfect.
I am CC Chambers, and with us is the illustrious Keith Merrill.
Thank you.
Thanks. That was fun, you guys.
A movie podcast should have more than just rolling on about the recent movies. It should also have stories, background, maybe hosted by an Emmy Award-winning movie critic. We have that on the Talking Pictures podcast.
Welcome to the Talking Pictures podcast. I am Raquel Horton.
And I'm Tony Toscano.
I am CC Chambers.
And our special guest today is
Lawrence White.
And we are at the Salt Lake City Comic Con, and Lawrence is going to tell us all about Thor.
No.
I'm just joking.
No, Raquel, this is the last time we let you do this.
I'm slightly obsessed with Chris Hemsworth, so I was hoping you would, go
Thor
along
has
with me.
been around since before Chris Hemsworth.
I know, but he made Thor. Do you know what I mean?
Well, you would make Thor sore.
That's terrible. Anyways.
Lawrence White is here. He is a publisher and a graphic artist, a writer. What else? How are you at cooking?
A Thor enthusiast.
Can you play marbles?
I can.
She's lost some.
I'm pretty much.
time ago.
I do everything and make the coffee, whatever it takes to make comic books. That's
Wow.
what I do.
When did you fall in love with comics?
As a kid, I was growing up in Idaho. There wasn't much to do, so it was supermarkets on the weekends with mom shopping, and I just hung out at the rack.
Wow.
What was your favorite?
Sounds like most teenagers.
There's a rack.
There's a rack.
No, I was a nerd. It was a bad
the
rack.
soldiers that have hung out in a rack.
Gosh,
This broadcast is for them.
when you were a kid, what was your favorite comic book?
I liked John Byrne. He did Fantastic Four and Alpha Flight and the Uncanny X-Men. He was my favorite artist and writer, so I just followed him.
That's from your childhood, right? I mean, just
right.
the
Yeah.
The 90s or the 80s?
No, it was the 80s.
Yeah.
It was
See, I go
early
back to the
40s.
60s and 70s
70s,
with Steranko
30s.
and
Yes.
Jack Kirby was a dear friend of mine, and Stan Lee. Everybody
wow.
knows I know Stan Lee.
Everyone knows Stan Lee and Tony. Okay.
Boris
Everybody
Vallejo.
knows Tony and Stan. Did you know that Tony and Stan Lee were friends?
We are friends. Very damn good friends.
Did
You're
you
just
know?
jealous.
I know now. Actually,
You're the only one that didn't know until right now.
It's on my business card.
Friend of Stan Lee.
Stan Lee friend.
I actually have a funny Stan Lee story. I was walking in Comic Con. I think it was like 90. It was early.
Was
93.
Tony there?
Yes, I know.
Yeah, he was there. He was.
True Believers?
Next to Stan Lee. I'm sorry, keep going.
We were in the parking lot, so I thought it was Tony in the back. No, I'm kidding.
I also know Brenda Lee, but that's
No, we went to lunch and we walked through a parking lot and we saw Stan Lee, and I told my friends, I go, that's Stan Lee right there. They're like, no way, he's too tall. I go, no, that's him. We're like, Stan. And he's talking to a guy in a black shirt. And he goes, he looks at the guy in the black shirt he was bald. And he says, yeah, we'll talk about that later. I meant to get a hold of you about that. And he looks at us, he goes, hey guys, how you doing? He's talking to us for a while, and then he looks over and he goes, well, if you know me, then you obviously know my friend here, Frank Miller.
Oh my God.
And we're like,
gosh.
whoa. And my buddy almost pushed Stan out of the way because he read The Dark Knight Returns on the way there. We drove to San Diego for the Comic-Con, and he almost pushed Stan out of the way. I'm like, Ryan, easy, man, chill.
Don't hurt Stan Lee.
Yeah.
Still Stan Lee.
So you're publishing a lot of works as graphic novels now.
Yes, we're going to do, it's kind of a long story, but I do them as an anthology because I'm going to publish these all myself, and I'm looking at investors, and I just want to get the most bang for my buck. So I'm doing anthologies, so I have 8 to 10 stories in one book, and then we'll put out X amount, and then when the story's done, then we can collect it as a trade paperback.
It's kind of like the Twilight Zone series, where you're doing different
Exactly.
stories under one cover, and all kind of. Do they have a running theme through them, or?
No, I want to do everything: crime, superhero, sci-fi, fantasy.
Is it all under the same universe, though?
Nope.
That you've, okay.
No, they're different. So I might I don't like to do crossovers because I think you lose readers with crossovers.
Yeah.
I think it's Marvel and DC. That's what's kind of shooting them in the foot. So I want their own standalone stories. So you don't have to have to know, have an encyclopedia to learn everything.
Go away. Raquel.
Raquel's
He
like,
can do a novel.
squeak.
Wait, watch this. He can do a novel on puppies.
Puppies.
There you go.
Don't mind us. We've known each other too long.
I know. We will edit this out of this.
I'm leaving that in.
Commercial break. Commercial
I
break.
edited my own self. And when do you have a lot of people coming to you and saying, "Hey, this looks good"? How do you judge what's the next thing?
As far as quality or
Well,
books?
as far as I go back to like the boardroom where somebody goes, let's do a movie about a tornado that's full of sharks. And from then on, anything sounds like a good idea to me.
I'm like Steranko and Kirby and Ditko, and I'm just a historian of comics. I invested in the character before I really, I cared how Peter Parker paid his rent, and if Thor is gonna, get back to Earth to find Jane Foster or whatever. I was invested in these characters. So, to meet somebody I actually met Bernie Wrightson downstairs, which is like a legend to me.
Wow.
So for me to meet him was, that was like meeting one of the Beatles to me just now, like last hour.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So it was the story. I love the story first. I love the characters. I didn't think about penciling, inking, all that kind of stuff. I was just invested in the story, and then I just want to learn all about these characters. So I'd buy comics and catch up on the stories. And
So what has gone past? Do you reach back and get story ideas and then bring them forward?
No, you know what I do? I just read the news and watch. I just see what's going on in the world, and then I let that I'll kind of walk along, and then I get hit with an idea. So I really don't get a lot from comic books anymore. It's more, I don't even know if I get more out of movies too much.
Now, when you publish, are you publishing digitally, or do you publish with a printer? And
Well, we have print set up, but that's where I'm at right now because I've funded everything myself. Now I'm at the point where I'm meeting investors here now to discuss about, because there's not a bona fide, comic book publisher in Utah. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of indie people and doing a lot of great stuff, but I want to have a presence.
But that type of press, that's is it a 6-color now? It's usually 4-color, isn't it?
I think they're going up to 6 now. Yeah.
6-color press. That's kind of hard to find. It's an injection.
If you go downstairs on the floor, there's a lot of people using them, like 3 or 4 people.
Yeah. Kind of interesting. So where do you anticipate your company to be? Let's say this time next year.
We'll probably have 4 or 5 issues out, and then when those come out, I'm going to send them off. I'm working in conjunction with a film studio in Canada, so they want me to be their in-house comic book guy. So however we structure this business, that's going to go straight to Canada, and I got an IP lawyer, and that's going to go right off.
Oh.
Do you have any intention or hope for turning some of your comic books into movies?
Yes, that's the whole point. Yes. Well, here's my yin to my yang. This is Alicia here, and she is all about social injustice and human rights, and she's my atomic girl. And what we're actually doing a book. It's called Fractured Souls, and it has to do with gender-based.
An entire world where racism, bigotry, sexism, all of that doesn't exist. It's a fantasy world. Right?
So it was a woman-created world.
Yes, it's a woman-created
The
world.
invention of lying.
Yes, and basically the story goes where another world invades. And so the whole purpose of this comic that I wanted to co-write with Lawrence is, in the story, it teaches women how to own their voice and empower themselves, because I feel like media really takes that away from us. I feel like society takes that away from us. And so I feel like this comic is just a fun way to explore that, but underneath it has a really strong message.
And I've got 2 women here.
I know,
Three.
he's sitting between a couple of feminists.
Woohoo,
But
go
I hear the term empowerment, and it just becomes like, it really is kind of a catch-all phrase because it's used so much.
Sure.
And not everything empowers women because it just has a woman in it.
Right.
So what is empowering about what Atomic Girl?
So what I feel like is empowering is about loving yourself. Because my idea of empowering a woman is you can't do that for someone else. That has to come from within them. Mm-hmm. And so it's teaching them how to do that. So teaching them to love themselves from the inside out, regardless of what you look like or what color your skin is, but honoring your voice and then allowing room for that to happen. I feel like, this is kind of heavy, but with the rape culture and things like that, I feel like the victim's voice is rarely heard. And then I think the more important part is when they're a victim, they turn into a survivor. And it's going to look different for everybody. I'm just exploring what it's looked like for me in my journey. It's always been a man's world. And so, those stereotypes in that square box that we're supposed to live in, I don't agree with that.
I think women do it to each other, though, a lot.
Oh, yeah.
And we have this fear of not being liked, of being shunned. And like, even media, they'll make you or break you depending on where you live and if they like what you have to say or not. And I think it has to, even same thing with racism and things like that. It's like, that's if you let them. If you don't care what the consequences, stand up, speak, shout, fight back. You'll be that warrior that breaks through.
Yeah.
How does Atomic Girl fight things like rape?
So actually, in the comic, there's going to be scenes of that. And so basically, because she has superpowers, what happens is every time a woman in the comic owns her voice in her own way, her strength gets stronger. So basically, there's going to be a scene, and it's kind of graphic, but where the woman is able to basically... how do I put this nicely?
No, don't. Use more podcast.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, basically, she chops his balls off. So, she's just able to take care of business.
Well, another thing we're working on, too, we're working with a nonprofit organization, Hopscotch. It's not almost. It's going to be a mentorship for other kids that kind of had a, rough go at life. And we're going to go and we're going to mentor them, and I'm going to show them how to, write or draw or find their gifts a little bit. Wow. So this is all kind of. I just want to be a writer and an artist. Now I'm turning into this thing with
philanthropist.
And I just realized I got to draw a guy getting his balls cut off just now.
You have to draw.
I know. Yeah, how am I going to do that? Yeah, that's how I'm going to go.
Panel.
Yeah, we're going that route.
Yeah, but now do you sit down and do you arc the stories before you do the artwork? Do you write out a whole story, or is it a continuation? Does this whole thing...
So we will go into script mode soon. It's just a plot. We want to make sure. I think it went from 4 books to 6 books, so that's going to be like 600 pages.
In film or television, we try to get 24 episodes done. Right. How many comic books do you have to get done to feel like, okay, we're publishable?
Yeah.
Well, if single issues, you want to do at least 3 to 4 before you get out of the box, because comic books are so detailed now that it's easy to do 2 or 3 months, and then you got to fill in artists, and we don't want to do that. We want to make sure it's the same creative team from beginning to end.
Will there ever be a time where you binge read a comic, where they'll publish all the episodes?
Yes. Yes. And that's now I think a lot of the single issues in comics, they're on the rebound, but they don't sell as well because people wait for the trade paperbacks. They want to get the whole complete story in one. So I have my editor, Mike Barron. He wrote The Flash and Punisher back in the 80s. And you probably know who he is.
When Frank Miller was Frank Miller.
Right.
Yeah. The Punisher's name.
Well, in fact, when Wally West took over as The Flash, Mike Barron was the one that wrote that for those first issues.
Oh my gosh, that's got to be
86.
86.
Mm-hmm. But Mike told me, he says, he goes, graphic novels are the way to go now. So I'm trying to get out of that single issue mentality.
Well, Sin City, all of those things came from graphic novels rather than comics.
Actually, Sin City came from an anthology, Dark Horse.
Yeah.
And then once it was done, then they collected it.
Do you take on the persona of Atomic Girl?
I do. Well, it's new. This just recently happened over the summer. So, that's my goal. Right now, I'm a substance abuse counselor at a treatment center, and I'm in school to become a therapist.
I have one more question I'm going to have Raquel and Cece. And there is a culture with cosplayers that, in fact, they had signs up that cosplay is not consent. There is this weird kind of thing that if a girl's dressed in skimpiness, she's portraying a character, the girls get groped, they get, molested. And it's really kind of a...
sick.
Jokey kind of, but it is abuse of some kind. So how do you balance that I want to do this? It's got to be safe.
The truth is no matter what you look like, nobody has a right to touch me. Consent is essential. If you don't have it, it's wrong.
To add to that, it's just one of those cultural things where worldwide, women were seen as we were wives, we were property, we were birthers.
Right.
It has been ingrained that men have a right to look at us. Men have a right to touch us. They have a right to see us as property, as objects. They forget that we're people, even though we're brothers, we're sisters, we're mothers, we're aunties. They forget we're people. And that right to touch me or touch you ends. Attraction is one thing. You're supposed to have attraction to people.
But this goes back to the 1930s, 1940s. We had the cigarette girl. And she'd go through the club with a little thing, a tray, and she'd get slapped on the ass and pinched and poked and all that. I think girls go through that all the time.
Yes.
This, we say that this here is a culture, it's safe, it's Comic-Con, people are accepting each other and role-playing, but it really isn't, because this is a dark side to this that happens all the time.
Yeah, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, so movies and comics, it was Conan and the Babes, and kind of grew up in that culture, And I understand why these guys have this mentality. It comes down to respect.
Yeah.
My mom taught me to respect women.
Yeah.
I'm fine if we do nudity, fine. If we do death and destruction and gore, I'm fine with that too. But I draw the line at no harm to children. Yeah. There's enough of that crap in the world. So that's the one thing I draw at. But here's the thing, though, especially the cosplayers, especially hanging out with Alicia, is that I want to have that. The awesome women, the awesome babes, and everything cool. But yeah, I have to stop. I have to stop and look at it different and think. We got to make this respectable. Yeah. And we got to make, we want to make it awesome, but what are we telling readers or the new generation of kids that this is okay? Yeah. We do have a responsibility not to be that way.
Wait, do your women have circle boobs?
No, I'm pretty realistic, but I know what you're talking about.
They have the large sloping teardrop boobs,
and they got the arch back, and there's like at an L shape. Yeah,
no. The 24-inch waist and the 38-inch hips.
I'm buying this comic.
That was 90s.
Kind of summate and end that on a great note. I think that's where women comic book characters are such a powerful dynamic force for that, even for our younger generations in movies, because you don't need permission to be powerful. You don't need permission to be great. And it's like I was saying at Sundance, you don't need permission to be you, to be great, to be magnificent.
But you do need permission to touch.
Yes.
You can give me permission. And stop touching my teardrop boobs.
Circles.
My circles. Yeah, it sounds really interesting. When you get into the psychology of this, it goes really deep, and that's what I think graphic novels have over comic books is there is a psychology and a deepness to it, like an onion. You just keep peeling layers of why. Some of the costumes that comic book women wear are done because a lot of the comic book artists went to strip clubs, and they kind of took that as very alluring. But somewhere in the 90s and in the 2000s, that switched a little bit to become more than that. And it seems like the new Wonder Woman costume is less showing boobs and vajayjay than as being armor.
Well, that was the answer for the 90s, because the 90s were the basketball cans and the butts stuck out in the screen, and so probably 5-6 years ago, people are like, whoa, this is enough. So yeah, they got the heat. They had to change it up, because Wonder Woman wears a lot more now. And
but it's a different kind of sexuality too. It's a confident and warrior-like.
Yeah.
Which
like
Xena, I think Xena kind of brought that in too. But
I love Xena.
and Lucy, God bless her, by the way. Hi, Lucy.
Is she listening?
She is right now.
Seriously? Because I love her so much.
Lucy, who's actually working with Bruce Campbell on the Evil Dead series.
Oh yeah.
She designed that. She designed that. Her husband was a producer of the show. And she designed that costume not to be skimpy, but to be leather warrior, Boris Vallejo type. Thank you guys for coming on, and tell us where to find the books. Tell us where we can find Atomic Girl.
It's going to be atomichorizon.net, but if you go Facebook, Atomic Horizon.
And I would just like to shout out again to Oliver Queen, Stephen Amell, if you're listening. I really, really want to kiss you.
Hey, thanks for being here, guys. It was great.
Hey, I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right.
From the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
And I'm Tony Toscano.
I'm Raquel Horton.
I am CC Chambers.
I'm Lawrence White.
And I'm Atomic Girl, Alicia Poor.
The Talking Pictures podcast is produced by Talking Pictures Productions. Produced by CC Chambers. Talking Pictures podcast distributed by Geek Factor Radio. Also on SoundCloud, Libsyn, and iTunes. Music and sound effects provided by bensound.com.